Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast, where we focus on having positive and productive conversations around money. I'm your host, Lauren, a 4-time Olympian and certified financial planner. On this show, my guests share their money stories. Everyone has a unique story and experiences both wins and losses when it comes to money. My intent is to give listeners something they can relate to, something that builds their courage to be open and take control of their own money story. When I'm not creating a great show for my listeners, I'm running my company, Worth Winning, where I help individuals and families organize their finances. Check us out at worth-winning.com. All right, now on with the show. Today, I'm excited to have Patrice Washington here to share her money memoir with us. Patrice is an award-winning author, transformational speaker, and the host of the Redefining Wealth Podcast, where she teaches people to chase purpose, not money. Now, I'm not a big fan on role models or referring to people as celebrities, but Patrice is like financial Beyonce for me. I'm going to just keep it real with y'all. She has a presence and an energy that is just awesome. And working with her has definitely challenged me to be a better version of myself. Patrice got her start as a personal finance expert referred to as America's Money Maven. And she was a reoccurring voice on the nationally syndicated Harvey Morning Show. I'm telling you guys, she is the real deal, having launched her first business straight out of college and having made it into a 7-figure success. But she has had trials just like the rest of us, and that business crumbled during the recession, and she had to start from scratch. I try to remind you all frequently that your current situation does not have to be your permanent situation. She rebuilt, and now Patrice is committed to redefining the term wealth. She will empower you to look at life through the lens of abundance and opportunity instead of lack and scarcity. I could not think of a better person to round out the Racial Wealth Divide series. Get your notebook out, get your Holy Ghost dance ready, because we about to have a little church up in here, y'all. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrice Washington. Well, Happy New Year, Patrice. It is so good to have you on the show. I am excited to chat with you today about the racial wealth divide.
I'm excited to finally be here. I'm trying not to be upset that it's taken this long for an invitation, but I will just say that I'm happy to finally be here.
Girl, you are the financial educator in my eyes. So I knew that when it was time to have Patrice on the podcast, I had better come correct. So don't take it as offense. I was just getting myself prepared so that we can have an A++ episode.
Gotcha. Okay, that sounds good. I'm with it then.
All right. So we are talking the racial wealth divide today, Patrice. And I know I just told everyone a little bit about you. And like I said, you being a financial educator. But could you educate us from your point of view on what it means to have a racial wealth divide in the first place? So some of the numbers I've seen, and actually the most generous numbers I've seen up to this point, are that for the median wealth for white Americans is $171,000, whereas the median wealth for African Americans is $17,000. Like I said, most of the numbers I've seen have been a lot worse than that. But what does it mean to have a racial wealth divide? And what are your just initial general thoughts when someone even mentions that term?
Well, I'm usually in a space where people mention it and talk about it as if it's a myth of some kind. And to your point, those were generous numbers because I've definitely heard much worse. And as an African-American woman, it just means to me, first of all, as a personal finance educator, that we have a lot of work to do in terms of educating Black households about how to be better with money. Because what we do know is that for the last few decades, we have continued to grow just in terms of education and entrepreneurship and access to capital. Now, it's still not what it should be, but it has grown. And because of that growth, we should expect to see that gap shrinking. But the truth is, it's not getting any better. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. One, for me, I'm a big mindset person. So my real background is more so in studying financial psychology and behavioral finance. So I'm always looking at what are the practical, everyday action steps that we can take to do better, right? Like not counting what other folks are doing out there, not what the quote unquote man, I'm using air quotes, Not what the man is doing, not what the system is doing, but also what are those things that we can do every day? Because quite honestly, when I talk to a lot of my Black friends, we just didn't have conversations about basic personal finance at home. And so I think it starts at the very ground level of just having more education in this area and also bringing people to an awareness of why they may be choosing sometimes poor financial habits, not because they don't have access to money, but because just their mindset around what to do with the money is not necessarily the most supportive.
I think mindset is a really key part of making some good steps in the right direction. And sometimes people think of things like, oh, well, the way that we bank and the way that credit scores are calculated, people of color are kept in the dark about investing. We don't know anything about taxes other than to manipulate the system and get our tax return. As you think about like mindset and changing that, what would you say to the people that are, like you said, we're being held down, or the man and the system is against us and not allowing us to continue forward? How does education play a role in us changing that whole mindset?
So I would have to say to other people what I said to myself in 2009 when I was the height of the recession, the Great Recession. I had launched a business straight out of college, gotten it to gross revenue of 7 figures, thought I was doing the thing, Lauren, okay? And the recession hit, and within 18 months, I had gone from this 7-figure business to scraping up change. And it's not because I didn't save. I had savings, which is what lasted us for quite a bit there. But I still didn't necessarily make wise choices. And one of the things when I was blaming President Bush and I was blaming the mortgage industry and I was blaming everyone else, one of the things I had to tell myself and remind myself is that personal finance is still about personal responsibility. And there were things that I could have done differently. There were older mortgage brokers in the office building where I had my office with my 16 loan officers and real estate agents. And I saw them closing up shops several months before we ever felt anything. These are guys I would say good morning to, coming in and out of the building or walking to our parking spots with our names on it. And it never dawned on me to even ask, like, you guys are doing pretty well. Why are you closing your doors? Where are you going? In my young ignorance, I was like, well, sucks for them, right? Like, we're taking all kind of money. Sorry, they're not. It never dawned on me that some of these people who were older than me had lived through other recessions and they could see the signs and they saw it coming. And so I had to take responsibility for the fact that I didn't ask. What questions did I not ask? What signs did I not pay attention to? What newspapers was I not reading? What news stories was I not watching? Because I lived in my own little bubble where I thought I was insulated from whatever else was going on in the world. And so I always tell people, it starts with personal responsibility. And I'm not saying beat yourself up, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. Now I know better. Now I would pay attention. But at that time, I was the one in my family who had done anything significant. And I would say that's the other part, is about who you're surrounding yourself with. Because for many of my friends who do have more education than maybe the generations before them, maybe their parents or grandparents didn't have the luxury of having higher education and their only dream was to send them to college, right? And so you get this false sense of security thinking, well, I'm the one who made it. Or you start to think that you're above some of these things that just happen and you're just not paying attention to the signs. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned over the last decade of just rebuilding my life is that being aware, putting myself in circles, in masterminds, in communities with people who are further along than I am and who know more about investing, who know more about trading, who know more about financial planning than I do, even at this stage, that's how I continue to grow. And that's how that language becomes like a second tongue. It's not so foreign, because one of the things I hear is, well, they make it hard so I don't understand. So then it's your job, it's your responsibility to put yourself in places where people are speaking that language so frequently and so fluently that it becomes like a second nature for you. But that has to be a deliberate action, because if you're going to stay in the same place, you're going to get the same results.
For sure. There's a saying that's popular that says, if you're the smartest person in the room, you should hurry up and leave that room.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that's the same with anything that you want to master, right? So whether it's finances or it's your dieting, your routine, your lifestyle routine, if it's relationships, If you want to be better in your relationship, you don't hang out with everyone who's divorced. You hang out with people who've been married for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? So that they can remind you the grass ain't greener, or they can remind you to pick your battles and that type of stuff. And so that's why I feel like, again, it's personal responsibility, because as one woman, I can't control what the government does and how the tax codes change and all of those things by myself. That I cannot do. But what I can do is control the environments that I put myself around, or the environments I put myself in, the people that I put myself around. I can control what I'm reading. I can control what I'm listening to, right? We're kind of preaching to the choir because your audience is listening to a podcast based on finances, but they know maybe they haven't always been that way, or they have friends or family who just refuse. But if you refuse to put yourself in those spaces and pour that type of content into your subconscious, into your being, then how do you turn around and complain?
I don't think that you can. I think that one of the things that you brought up that's really important about this is like not just educating yourself and taking responsibility for educating yourself, but you talked about going into rooms with other people that know information. My question for you is about, how do you start that conversation? Because I'd imagine if we're talking about a racial wealth divide and you doing really well for yourself, that sometimes those rooms that you're entering into with people that have more information than you do, the people don't look like you.
Right.
Has it ever been really hard for you to get a conversation going with someone that's a majority or old white male? Or when you are the only person in a room that looks like you, how do you get those conversations going to get that information out of them?
You know what? I have to say wholeheartedly that I have had personally so many people pour into me that did not look like me, in all honesty. And I think that the space was created for that. First of all, when I was able to humble myself and just say, I don't know what I don't know. I remember one time, I'm trying to think of the name of the restaurant. I think it was Coco's, like a Coco's. I don't know if anyone, I'm from California. So it puts me in the mind of a Coco's. And I overheard these two older white men having this conversation about real estate. And this was after the recession. I had already lost everything, lost all my properties, foreclosed, bankrupt, all the good things, all the great things I had already experienced. I was having breakfast by myself, waiting for an appointment, but I got to the area early and I went and had breakfast. These two older gentlemen were talking about their apartment buildings. They were in a great conversation. I literally turned around and I was like, hi, I noticed you guys were talking about apartment buildings. That's something that I want to get into. And I told them a little bit about my story. And one of the guys, he starts saying, oh, well, that's where you went wrong. He just started like dropping gems on me. It had to be no more than like a 10-minute conversation in a Coco's, but it planted seeds that got me asking my financial advisor different questions the next time that we spoke about when my husband and I would be ready to get back into investing in real estate. But more in particular, we don't invest in single family residences anymore. We do multi-unit apartment buildings. But that thought was sparked from listening to these two older white men in a Coco's. It was not a networking event. I was not invited to the table. There was no formal introduction, right? It literally was asking the question, now, are you always going to get someone who is as generous as one man in particular was much more generous with information at the table and was just kind of sharing and let me, tell my 1-minute story type of thing. Is that always going to happen? No, but that instance encouraged me to be that bold, to ask questions. And over the years, no matter the color, especially people who were older than me, who had lived a little longer, who have had greater success in some of these areas, not thinking that because I wear the title America's Money Maven, that I want people to feel like I know it all, because I don't. And I'm still open to learning, and I'm still open to asking questions. One of the greatest lessons, like I said, I learned in the recession was that I didn't ask any questions. And I wasn't groomed to ask questions. I grew up with a single mom and my grandma. These are strong Caribbean women who were like, you figure it out, you figure it out. So I always grew up figuring it out. And I grew up like many Black people do in a household where folks will tell you, don't tell nobody our business. So when you live with this in the back of your mind, it is very hard to conceptualize talking to strangers and telling a stranger your business, whether that be a therapist or a financial planner, advisor, or some man in cocos. It is very hard to break out of that shell. But I realized that that mentality is not serving me. That does not serve me.
Yeah, what you had to gain was far more than what you had to lose by getting over that fear and opening your mouth and asking the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I don't think it's about being invited into the conversation. I think it's about starting the conversation whenever you feel like it's appropriate. And I don't want to say when you feel like it's appropriate, because I don't think it was appropriate to stop these two men from talking because I was eavesdropping in Coco's. It's not even about being appropriate. It's about being intentional. I continued to sit there when I was still waiting for my appointment and listen to more of their conversation to understand more about what they were talking about with their tenants and choosing property managers and all this stuff. It was a really great conversation that I made a part of my own learning. And I think that we can do that.
We can definitely do it. We just need to get excited about the idea that the opportunities exist out there. I think we do a lot of focusing on the obstacles. And in fact, a lot of the conversation with my peers, we're talking about, like you said, getting the wisdom of wise older people, but the conversation with my peers and as millennials, they call us, has been very angry. And I always wonder, why are we so mad at Black people as young people? Because we know that there's been a lot of stuff that has happened in the past. And as we educate ourselves, it is angering. But at the same point, we weren't alive for a lot of it. And why are we so focused on the past when, one, as educated people, we know that forgiveness is necessary for us to move forward. And I feel that we should be focusing on letting go of the past, embracing the future, but we're not always there. And I know that your motto is chase purpose, not money. So can you talk to us about the mindset that the younger generation of people of color should be approaching changing this idea of the racial wealth divide and how we feel about white people in general?
Well, I don't know that for me it's so much about letting go, because honestly, I didn't know much about my history until probably the last 5 to 7 years or so that I've been more intentional. And I'm Caribbean, so I didn't necessarily grow up with this concept like a lot of my friends did who had family that came from the South. And they had these stories that were kind of passed down about Uncle so-and-so who may have looked at a white woman inappropriately and had this experience or this or that. That wasn't necessarily my story. And so I didn't always identify with it. And also growing up in California, I just didn't necessarily identify with it until I moved to the South. And I don't know for me that it's about letting go. I think it's about not letting it run my life, though. I think that as a mom, I want my daughter to know. I just took her to see Just Mercy. I took her to see Selma, and she's 12 years old. So she was maybe 7 or 8. I've always taken her to see these different movies because I want her to know that you don't have a right to whine and complain because your life is just not that hard. I'm sorry, it's not that hard. You haven't had to come through what our ancestors have had to come through. So my expectation of you is excellence. If these people could stand and fight and do whatever it takes to not just save themselves or their families, but to really bring an entire race forward as much as possible, as much as they could with what they had at that time, you don't have an excuse. I give no leeway for you, right? And I feel the same way about me as someone who's Central American from Belize, that my grandmother came to this country illiterate. And here I am on my way to being a 5-time author, hopefully best-selling author. Best-selling with the last 4, but hopefully this 5th one will be just as good, if not better. And for me, even in writing my books, it's like my grandmother didn't get to go to school. So I don't have a right to not take my education seriously. That was her dream. And I can't let go of what my parents endured, what my grandparents endured, what my great-great-grandparents may have endured that I don't even know of, what the history in this country is. For me, it's not about letting go, but it's not holding on to it either from this standpoint of making me angry. It's actually the fuel for me to continue to pave the way for African-American women in particular who are coming behind me. We're both in this financial space and I'm just a few steps ahead of you, right? In terms of just how long I've been at it and some of the things that I've done, it's my responsibility to charge more and more so that when you walk into the same rooms, they don't try to play you.
Yes.
It's my responsibility to keep showing up in excellence and doing what I'm called to do, chasing purpose, not money, but that doesn't mean that I don't get my money. Like, that doesn't mean that I will show up in excellence and you will pay me $2. That doesn't mean that I will show up as an influencer to an event and you will pay me 79% on the dollar of what you paid my white male counterpart who was also invited to this event, because he's my friend and I ask questions and I'm not scared to ask questions. And if he tells me that he got paid more than me to do the exact same job in the exact same way, when we have a similar audience, if not my audience being better, then I will be back, right?
We are going to have a problem.
Like, yeah, I will be back. And I'm not scared to ask those questions. It's not to live chained to what happened. I think there's still a tether there, but that tether is just that slight reminder, like, look, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility. You have an opportunity in front of you that 50 years ago did not exist. It did not exist. Definitely 100 years ago. Oh my gosh. Like, sometimes I see these movies or I read these stories and I look at these documentaries and I know that we were chosen for the time that we were supposed to be on this earth. Right. And my thing is, like, I just don't want to waste the time. Too many people have come before me in order to pave the way. And now I got to go all in. I got to go all in. I can't harp on any one thing in particular. I have to go all in. And I think that we're all called to go in different ways. I think that there's a space for people who fight the injustices that we still are experiencing every day.
Yes.
There is a space for them. They were born for such a time as this to pick up that mantle and carry it forward. Economic empowerment is going to be the number one thing that helps African Americans rise as a whole in this country and across the world, which is going back to the fact that we have to make it relatable. If it's not broken down in layman's terms, that's our job. If they're not going to talk about mindset, that's our job. If those conversations are not going to be had at the dining room table, okay, now we have Google Academy, where you can find a podcast, a book, a blog, something that piques your fancy, but that will elevate the way you think about money. And our job is to continue to create quality content and put it out there so that hopefully it sparks the interest and helps create a shift and some type of transformation so that we can help shrink this gap. That's my only responsibility out here, is to do my part to help shift people's mindsets and their behaviors so that they can shrink the gap, even when they don't know that that's what they're participating in, because not everyone even cares about shrinking the gap.
That is so true. And if you are driving, I hope you have pulled over to the side of the road now, pulled out a notebook, a napkin, something, because she is dropping all the gems right now. It is our personal responsibility that we need to embrace, like you said, and use the information of the past to fuel you toward the future. And I think one of the things that we also need to think about too is, like you said, beyond our personal responsibility, like, how do we come together as a community? So I know that you reside in Atlanta, which has a large Black community. I think, in fact, it's around like 51% African American and around 40% white. What can we do in addition to our individual role and responsibility to, like, make the most of ourselves, but as a community to support one another to continue to close this gap?
I think one big way is to really make a conscious effort to support Black businesses. Yes, in Atlanta, the statistic you quoted is probably true, 51% African American. I don't know, however, that we always work together.
Mm.
And I'm speaking for myself. I don't represent every Black person in Atlanta. I just moved back here last year. But I can say personally that I have really been trying to do better at supporting Black businesses, because I have even found personally, Lauren, that in my own coaching business, throwing masterminds, throwing retreats, all those stuff, while I have a very diverse audience, while I have a lot of white women who will send me DMs every day and tell me how much they love me, when I present a coaching opportunity or program opportunity, they don't join.
Interesting.
Right? They don't necessarily sign up. And I've asked several, why? The things that I answer in this program are the things that you ask me questions about in the DMs every day. And then I see you go invest in someone else's program. Why? And I had one woman tell me on a discovery call, she said, I really love you, but I'm not a soul sister.
Oh.
I said, what does that mean? She's
Right.
like, I just wanted you to know that I'm not Black. And I'm like, well, why would you need to be Black to work with me? So I think there's something really interesting that happens, right? So if we want goods or services, we're just looking for the best, right? The best that I can afford within my budget.
Mm-hmm.
I used to, for the longest, again, coming from this background, from California, I just wanted whoever was going to do the best job that I can afford. So I literally never thought about specifically using a Black person. However, in the last several years, I have experienced personally how many times people will want my gift and want what I bring to the table, but then not necessarily want to invest in it monetarily. And that started me on the path of being a bit more intentional, because it feels like whether it's intentional or not, there are people who don't realize the bias that they have towards supporting Black entrepreneurs. And so I get tired of looking up and saying, oh gosh, what happened to that store? Or, oh my gosh, she was so awesome. She had a wonderful bakery. Like, how'd she go out of business? Well, if she had any experience like I did, where someone is like, if I have a choice, I'm going to go what feels, more similar to me, which I think is what happens. I don't think people are consciously making that choice, but I think on the subconscious, it's like, if I have a choice between Sue and Shan, I'm going to go with Sue. And I think as a Black woman, it's become apparent to me that I just have to be a bit more intentional about supporting Black businesses that are going to go and support Black churches, that are going to go and support hopefully other Black small businesses, so that we can continue to help decrease the gap. Because if we're actively supporting each other and we're aware of that and putting more money and more capital into the businesses of Black owners, then hopefully that will help do the part to help close the divide. And that wasn't something that I was always aware of. I really wasn't. And if it weren't for my experience in the last couple of years, every time I ask some of my followers why they chose this program over mine, it has been, well, they don't know that you will work with white people. I'm like, why would I not? I answer you all the time. I talk to you in DMs all the time. I answer your email questions all the time. So why, when it comes to investing and working with me, would I not all of a sudden, would I be like, sorry, Black only?
Right. Right.
So for me, it's not that every person that I use needs to be a Black person. It's just that I have now, especially being in a place like Atlanta where there are so many Black small businesses to choose from, I'm more aware of the fact that they could be experiencing something like I've experienced. And so therefore, I feel like it's my responsibility to sow into those businesses, as long as the quality of the services are what I would get anyway, what I would pay for anywhere.
I think that is a really, really good point. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because you would assume that, with Atlanta being so densely populated African-American, that would be kind of an automatic thing that's happening. But it sounds like we're kind of slow to adopt that as well. But you do have a better opportunity to be able to do so by being where Black businesses are on a regular basis. And one of the things that you brought up is this idea that, I didn't think you worked with white people because you're Black. Sometimes people just need that mindset shift that, like, these are services for everybody, period. This is what it is. And so there's a mindset shift that needs to happen on our side as people of color to continue to move forward. But there's also some things that need to be dealt with the majority, because I think many people are listening to this podcast that are not a person of color, and they're wondering, like, how can I get involved in this? How can I help close the race or wealth divide? I didn't realize I was on the other side of this, or I'd love to be able to do my part as well. So what do you think that the majority can do to join the conversation?
I think that they need to do the same thing that I just said. They need to look at the diversity of the suppliers that they use. And again, I think that it comes down to people will go, oh, well, I'm just looking for the best deal, the best price. I don't see color, but it would help if you did. It would help if you did see color. It would help if you were like, you know what? Every person that I use in my business, every supplier that I use in my business, every person who I use to help do things on my home improvement, they're always white. There's got to be a Black person, a brown person, some person of color who's just as good, who's just as talented, who's just as educated that can support me. There's got to be. And you have to stop this, I don't see color, right? Like last year, I did a shout out to several of the organizations who invited me to speak. Now, in most places that I go and speak, Lauren, I am the only Black speaker. I am the only Black speaker. And I'm not talking about breakout. I'm talking about keynote. I am the only Black speaker. And I know for a fact that several of those people intentionally chose me because they looked at their rosters and they were like, oh my gosh, it's all white women. Oh my gosh, there's all white men and one white woman, and we need some color. But at least they had the foresight to go, we have to do better. And I think that it's about exposure too, because if your friends are not necessarily Black, if all your friends are white, then the only thing you're going to see as an option are white people. You're going to be like, oh, I'm going to get her, I'll get her, I'll get her. I was invited into a really exclusive mastermind for that reason, because the women looked up and went, oh my gosh, we wanted to have this mastermind of women supporting women and all this stuff. And we look up and there's 10 white women. Do none of us know a woman of color? What is going on here? And they had to ask themselves that question. They had to have that hard conversation. And then they invited my girlfriend, Koya, and I into the mix. She's now my girlfriend. I didn't know her at the time, but they invited 2 Black women into the mix and a Hispanic woman just to add some diversity. And so the thing is not to act like you don't see it and you can't tell. The thing is to go take inventory. If you want to be supportive and you want to help us close this gap, take inventory. Where are you spending your dollars? Who are you giving opportunities to? Who are you inviting into your networking events, into your mixers? Make a conscious effort. And let me tell you something. I am not offended when someone says to me, we really want you because you're a Black woman. I'm not offended by that. I'm proud of that. I'm proud that they realize that they have Black women, Black men, people of color sprinkled throughout their audience who need to see someone who looks like them so they know that it's possible. That is important. Representation really does matter. I did this interview with Women of Impact, a part of the Impact Theory family that went viral. And it was one of their first interviews that actually went viral last year. It has over 500,000 views on YouTube. And the number one comment that they kept getting was, I almost gave up on this channel because I never saw a woman of color.
Wow.
I saw that if I didn't see it 30, 40 times within those first few days, I haven't gone back to really read the comments now. But within those first few days when it came back, I promise you, I saw at least 30 people say, I'm so glad you finally have a person of color. I almost unsubscribed. I almost stopped watching this. Oh, you really do know Black people.
Right.
But Lisa, who I give all credit to, Lisa Bilyeu, who I love dearly, Lisa was intentional about that. And even since then, Lisa has been like, friend, do you know any great women of color that I should have on the show? That's someone who wants to close the divide, because I got dozens of clients from that one interview, right? And so putting women or people of color in position so that their businesses can actually thrive when you have the power to is how you help close the gap.
I love it. I love it. I love it. It sounds like, to sum that up, it's to not be looking for culture fits, because culture fits can be everybody that looks just like you. If you're looking for someone who fits your culture, it's going to be more of the same, but you're looking for culture adds instead to continue to create diversity in whatever it is that you're doing, whatever industry you're in. So be thinking about how you can add to your culture instead of just keep fitting into what already exists.
Yeah.
Okay. As we wrap, sum up for us what the 3 things that you would love that listeners take away from what you've said today. You've said so much, but if you just had to sum it up and say, like, don't forget these 3 things, what is that for you?
So don't forget these 3 things. First of all, personal finance is rooted in personal responsibility. the best thing about childhood is that it's over. And so it does not matter what you learned, what you heard, who said what. It matters to an extent, but you have the power to change it is the real thing. And you have to start with owning that you have the power to change it. So that's one. A second thing would be, I think what we just said about seeing color and getting away from this narrative that I don't see color. If you truly want to help create a more diverse environment in your personal environment where you are, then you have to see color, because you have to see when there is no color there, and you have to take responsibility for adding it and know that we are not offended. Not that I speak on behalf of all Black people, but I believe that we are not necessarily offended, and we want to be the representation so that others know, hey, we're here, we're building a name, we're building a voice, and we can do this together. I think that's really important. And I would say my message always is just chase purpose, not money. That is truly the thing that saved my life 10 years ago, because there are so many opportunities that I could have taken to do really random things when I was at the lowest point of my life. And because I knew that I was called to help people in this way, I kept refusing, and it didn't make sense in the moment. It didn't make financial sense, definitely, because I needed the money. It wasn't logical. It was none of those things, but I felt like I had a responsibility, like a true call on my life. And because I didn't give up when it got tough and I hung in there, chasing purpose really allowed money to become the natural byproduct. It doesn't always feel like it when you're at your worst, but there's a reason that you're going through any type of financial difficulty you may be going through. And if you just hold on and trust the process and chase purpose, I pray that it'll all work out for your good.
It will all work out for your good. Patrice, thank you so much. Could you please just share with the audience before you run out where we can find you, what you're working on, how we can continue to support you? I'd love that.
Sure. You can find me at patricewashington.com, PATRICE, Washington.com. That's where the podcast lives. It's on all major platforms as well, but the podcast is Redefining Wealth. This year, I'm putting out my 5th book. It's called You Can Redefine Wealth for Yourself, which I'm super excited about. And I love to play on Instagram. It's my favorite social media. So I'm at Seek Wisdom PCW. That's Seek Wisdom PCW.
All right, Patrice, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Anytime.
Patrice was a perfect person to wrap up this series. This was such an important conversation to have, and one that needs to continue if we're going to close the gap. The statistics are astounding and the work ahead is hard, but there are not many things worth having that are easy. Patrice brought up some great tips for both majority and minority groups to start making lasting changes. I encourage you to think about the 3 takeaways. Personal finance is rooted in personal responsibility. Get away from the narrative of, I don't see color, and chase purpose, not money. Our word of the day today is redlining, but to shed light on it, I need to share some history. So in 1865, the Civil War ended and General William Sherman asked a group of African-American leaders, what do you all need to move forward? They answered, land. Now, you may have heard of the term 40 acres and a mule. Well, what had happened was they set aside land for this purpose with the maximum allowable amount being 40 acres. I have no idea how the mule got added. I did do some research and I did not find the mule. So we just added that in somewhere. But the rest of this is real, y'all. Long story short, Lincoln was assassinated. He was the one that was going to make sure that plan became an action plan. And once he was assassinated, the next president reversed it immediately. Now, fast forward 100 years to the 1930s, well into the civil rights movement, and redlining was the predominant problem. People of color were refused loans or pointed away from certain neighborhoods when they wanted to purchase because white homeowners thought their property value would decrease, and lenders deemed them to be a poor financial risk. It was outlawed in 1968, but change was slow to come. Subprime loans were the next problem. Now, a subprime loan is said to be a loan that's offered to people who don't qualify for a conventional loan, either because of low income, high loan-to-value ratio, or poor credit history. But that didn't even hold true. Black people that were qualified still got subprime loans. And we all know that subprime lending was a big factor during the housing crisis, and it caused tons of Black people to lose their homes. And I'm sad to say I was one of the people affected by subprime lending. I bought a home in 2006, right before that crash, and sold that home in 2017 for less than what I paid for it. So we're 11 years down the road and I still couldn't get my money back. And just last year, I received a check in the mail from a class action lawsuit having been identified as a victim of subprime lending. And if we bring it to present day, land is synonymous with home ownership, and that's something that can still help us. But getting crappy lending agreements and putting people in homes they can't afford because their finances are not properly organized is still a problem that could lead to destruction. Simply giving the ability to buy is not enough. We need the opportunity to settle in and leave something behind for the next generation. So if you're out there and you're thinking about home ownership, ask yourself, what have I done with the other aspects of my financial life to be prepared for this purchase? What might I need to tighten up to give myself the best chance to make this an asset that can change my financial trajectory? Thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you in April for season 2. As always, if you have financial questions, suggestions for guests, or would like to share your own money memoir, please contact us through our website, worth-listening.com.